that great introduction. Good morning, everybody. My name is Adrianne Thomas, and I am the FEMA Region 6 Hurricane Program Manager, supporting the great states of Louisiana and Texas. Today, I'm going to talk about the National Hurricane Program and how it assists states and locals prepare for and respond to tropical cyclones. So I've only got about 4 slides for you guys today, but let's go ahead and get into what the National Hurricane Program is all about. So the mission of the National Hurricane Program is to support our first responders, is to ensure that as a nation, we work together to build, sustain, and improve our capabilities to prepare for, mitigate, protect against, and respond to hurricanes. It consists of an interagency partnership between FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the National Hurricane Center. The Army Corps of Engineers provides project management and administration of the web-based evacuation decision support tool, HURVAC, while the National Hurricane Center provides SLOSH basin development, management, and other in-kind services such as training. And every year, the National Hurricane Center coordinates several training opportunities with the National Hurricane Program, including one of the more bigger courses, the FEMA-sponsored L324 course, Hurricane Preparedness for Decision Makers. And FEMA ties it all together, providing overall coordination of the program, which results in 3 main deliverables: our planning assistance, training, and our operation decision support. And as the Hurricane Program Manager for Region 6, I'm responsible for delivering these products, training, and support to my region, state, and local officials. I work closely with the Army Corps of Engineers to manage our hurricane evacuation studies for my region, which are a vital deliverable of the program that's used for evacuation planning and guidance for our state and locals that are at risk. And I'll touch more on the hurricane evacuation studies in our next slide. I also serve as a member of FEMA's Hurricane Liaison Team, or HLT for short. And how it works is that when a tropical cyclone is considered a credible threat to my region, I deploy to the National Hurricane Center in Miami under the HLT, and I serve as the regional team lead. And in this role, I'm providing a rapid exchange of real-time information and guidance to our state and our local emergency managers to support their hurricane evacuation decisions. And at the same time, I'm feeding this real-time information from the floor of the National Hurricane Center back to FEMA Region 6. So simply put, the HLT serves as a conduit for information between the National Hurricane Center and the emergency management community. So I said I wanted to talk a little bit about the hurricane evacuation studies, and for good reason. It's one of our biggest contributions from the National Hurricane Program. They provide critical planning factors and information that guide state and local hurricane evacuation and response plans. And there are 6 study areas in Region 6. There's 4 in Texas, and there's 2 in Louisiana. And you can see the different study areas on the graph, or the map that I have here on that slide. The hurricane evacuation studies consist of 5 parts. So we have a hazard analysis, which gives us our storm surge risk map, while the vulnerability analysis identifies the at-risk population and aids in the development of our evacuation zone. And then we have the behavioral analysis. And this is a survey of the at-risk population. We utilize that survey to determine our assumptions. Who will evacuate? How many cars are they taking? Where do they get their information? Are they getting it from their local officials? Are they listening to friends and family? Are they getting their information from local news or from a cable news broadcast like the Weather Channel? All of this valuable information helps us to know how to tailor our message and how to deliver that message, which avenues we're going to use to push this message out. The 4th analysis is our shelter analysis, and that provides an estimate for the number of evacuees that could potentially seek shelter. And lastly, we have the transportation analysis. This analysis ingests all of the other 4 and aids in the calculation of our evacuation clearance time. This combined effort gives us a holistic approach to evacuation planning. And even though a lot of our products are geared towards our state and our locals, here in FEMA Region 6 and in FEMA as a whole, we utilize this same information at the federal level for our own plans. So like I was saying, I was giving a brief mention of the National Hurricane Program, and I touched on 3 or more of the forward-facing components. However, there are other aspects of the program that are geared towards intergovernmental hurricane preparedness. I left my link up here at the top for you guys if you had any other questions or if you wanted to find more information about the National Hurricane Program and all of its components that it's made up of. You can visit that link above. I also have our distro email, so if you had specific questions that you wanted to ask the National Hurricane Program, you can reach us there. But I do appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to be able to speak to everybody today, and I will be around for any other questions with the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this today. As mentioned, I've been working in North Carolina for a number of years now, just over 7, and North Carolina is unfortunately no stranger to disasters, specifically hurricanes, and we've had our fair share over the more recent years since really Hurricane Matthew back in 2016. And so I'm really excited today to just share for a few minutes where we feel like we are with safety messaging for hurricanes. Obviously, it's a huge challenge because it is evolving and we are all the time fighting people making analogs of other storms or just drawing conclusions about what things have been like in the past. And we, even just as recently as 2 weeks ago, impacted by Hurricane Isaias and in North Carolina, and where all of our experience over the past couple of years has really sifted down to for tropical safety messaging has been do not discount all of these hazards, the associated hazards. And we get so concentrated on focusing on the line and on the track and forgetting that we have this impact far from the center and outside of the forecast cone. And so I've included a couple of graphics here, and I'm sure that many of you have seen these if you watch any type of news following the storms. But North Carolina's been really hard hit. On the left, we've got Hurricane Florence that hit us a couple of years ago. And actually, after Matthew became our storm of record, Florence set that new record and is now our storm of record, where we had devastating storm surge, inland and coastal flooding. We had heavy rain. We had riverine flooding. We had wind. We had all of those components. And this is a picture from New Bern. And so then last year we had Hurricane Dorian, and that was a big deal for people on Ocracoke Island, where we had 4 to 5, 6 feet of surge in some areas in a matter of an hour and a half with that water rise. And then one thing that we always seem to forget about is the threat of tornadoes. And most recently, we had an EF3 in Bertie County, which is across our coastal plain in eastern North Carolina from Hurricane Isaias. And you can see the picture here, just total devastation. And where we find ourselves is that each storm brings about these new associated hazards, and it's things that we know about, but it is the continuous messaging that is needed, that we do not need to discount these threats just because of the category of storm. For example, Hurricane Dorian and Hurricane Isaias were Category 1 storms. Hurricane Florence was a bit stronger, but nonetheless, we're talking about these things that can often be forgotten. So one thing is the State Emergency Management Office, and what we see as a theme continued across our other state counterparts is just that need to reiterate the messaging as it relates to the associated hazards, whether they be storm surge, inland flooding, tornadoes, especially when they occur at night. That's super dangerous, which is in the case of the Bertie County tornado that occurred overnight in the dark. And so just remembering that it's not even just about where the storm makes landfall. We have all of these cascading impacts that really lend to some really large and heavy-hitting response and recovery efforts that are needed. So in terms of just general messaging, that's what we try to focus on is don't pay attention to the category, don't pay attention even to the track, but remember that in a lot of cases, and in the case of all 3 of these storms, they were statewide impacts. So, of course, this year it looks a little bit different. We're in a COVID-19 environment, and that has required a lot of advanced planning and preparation from a state emergency management side. And I feel comfortable that the things I'm going to say are not just the thoughts of North Carolina emergency management, which I'm speaking specifically about, but across all of our state counterparts. We've been regularly conversing with our state counterparts about where they see their challenges are in a COVID-19 environment, sheltering being at the top of those lists, and a continuous concern about what we do and how we handle those people that need to evacuate. Because one of the things that we're messaging and continue to do to message on all platforms is that protecting yourself from the physical dangers of a hurricane takes priority over any concern related to COVID-19. If you have a storm that is expected to impact your area in however much of a degree, it's very important, and we continue to message that people need to respond to that. And if there are evacuation orders in place, heed those warnings, because we can deal with the implications of COVID-19, but the important part is to protect yourself from those more immediate dangers, which could be river flooding, storm surge, wind, tornadoes, all of those things. One other thing that we're messaging is that, of course, social distancing is required, is limiting the capacity at shelters, and that non-congregate sheltering options are being explored. This is the case in North Carolina and with other states as well. Some states so far have even used this for severe weather earlier this year. But things like dorms and campgrounds and other facilities are really trying to be creative in how we can shelter people safely from the storm, while also keeping in mind those real key things as it relates to COVID-19. So, kind of in closing out this concept, we are messaging on two types of two platforms. So we've got planning. Where will you go? So staying with a family or friends or at a hotel, staying in a storm shelter is not the best option. It's not your first choice. It should not be your go-to. It should be staying with friends, staying with family, or seeking out a hotel. And in our statewide approach of non-congregate sheltering, we have been entering into some agreements with hotels so that we can safely shelter people. And then preparing, what do you need? We push the messaging, as all of us do, about needing that emergency kit. Well, what should change this year? And that is really the additional supplies that would be a face mask, hand sanitizer, and any cleaning products, of course, that you can get your hands on these days, that you would include in that kit and that you would take wherever you needed to go. So what the two things that we've been messaging overall in summary is, when you're talking about the storm, don't discount what the storm can do. Even if the track doesn't necessarily say your area will be impacted, that's not to say nothing's off the table. And then in a COVID-19 environment, we are really trying to ease the anxiety, which we know is there, that you have to keep you and your family safe, and we can help you figure out a way to do that in the best possible way through things such as non-congregate sheltering or staying with friends and family. But it's important to not let COVID not make you react so that you can stay safe from the storm. So with that, I'll wrap up my presentation there, and I'm happy to take questions later. I can't wait to see if you do have any questions. So thank you for the opportunity to present and talk about this.
Well, thank you. That was very quick and concise, but you got a lot of it in a short period of time. I don't think we've got Nim Kidd yet. I do see Dan Brown. Hi, Dan. Our next speaker will be turn away from the governmental approach for a moment here, and we'll look at the private sector meteorology world and how they message in a hurricane. After attaining his degree in meteorology from Purdue, Dan Kottlowski embarked on his 38-year career in operational forecasting with AccuWeather out of Pennsylvania. He is currently a senior meteorologist with the company, and important to today's discussion, serves as their lead hurricane forecaster. In this capacity, he provides vital weather information to clients impacted by tropical cyclones around the globe. Dan is a big supporter of the National Tropical Weather Conference and has presented in this forum as well as previous conferences on South Padre Island. So Dan, take it away.
Okay, thanks a lot, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Getting the messaging is vitally important. We can get the forecast correctly, but if we're saying the wrong words, people can misunderstand what we're talking about then. I just want to quickly talk about this season again. This is going to be a very busy season this year. All indications are this could be a year where we have more than 20 tropical storms. We may have to go to the Greek alphabet. And again, there's a pretty good chance we're going to have additional impacts. We've already had 5 impacts, direct landfalls on the U.S., including 2 hurricanes and 3 tropical storms. And that means everybody along the coast, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, need to be prepared for this situation. the biggest thing that everyone is messaging is to have a hurricane plan in place. But to develop that, you got to know your risks. And what we try to do as meteorologists collectively, we try to get people to understand their individual vulnerability in the hurricane situation. Excuse me. The biggest issue that I see is the fact that there's a different message for where you live. If you live near the coast, it's going to be a different message than if you live several miles inland. But you may both be impacted by a very severe situation. As Katie and Adrianne has talked about, you've got to worry about all the different factors there: tornadoes, storm surge flooding, inland flooding, and of course the really damaging winds. Then one of the things people forget is you got to check with your insurance providers to see what you're covered for. Right now, frankly, you're probably too late to really make any changes, but certainly it doesn't hurt to stay in touch with the insurance people to make sure you understand what the situation is then. Messaging, as I said earlier, each homeowner and business owner has vulnerabilities that are unique to their situation. Some cases, messaging for storm surge and damaging hurricane force winds might be very important for those living and working right along the coast, but people living further inland are going to be more vulnerable to maybe inland flooding and tornadoes. As Katie pointed out, this is not going to be a typical hurricane season. We've got all kinds of issues going on this year with the virus. And so when we have power outages, what's interesting is we are so dependent upon the internet now that when the power goes out, the internet goes out. And even if you have battery backup, if your lines which come into your home or your microwave tower are somehow compromised, you're not going to have internet either. So again, you got to have a backup plan for that. And again, one of the concern we have is we've been working with hospitals and healthcare facilities during the COVID outbreak here, and evacuations are going to have to be conducted much differently. We have a much larger number of people, though, that are going to be very sick and will be vulnerable to any move that they have to make. So again, our messaging to these people have to be very, very important. We have to make sure they understand well in advance what the situation is. The business chain disruption is, again, going to be problematic because of the COVID-19. Everyone is doing things differently. There's more people have had to reschedule the way they conduct business. Imagine adding a hurricane to that situation. So again, the messaging we're trying to tell people is the fact that they have to think above what they normally would think in a disaster type situation because of the virus then. So one of the things I looked at is what we say before a hurricane makes landfall can influence people. As Bill mentioned earlier, when you start seeing these spaghetti lines showing up on your TV screens, again, some people do what is called anchoring. They lock on to an idea 5 or 6 days out. So we as meteorologists and other communicators need to make sure that what we are saying 5, 6 days out before a storm hits, that we're not misleading people in the wrong direction. So we have to choose our words wisely so that people will not be confused. It's amazing how non-meteorologists, especially people who are not really science savvy, can get confused on the messaging that you hear about a storm well in advance. We have to be very careful how we're conducting ourselves. And again, we need to admit that the long-range forecast is highly uncertain, but we need to articulate what we know and keep the potential scenarios simple and understandable. All tropical storms and hurricanes can create extensive damage and can kill. Should never downrate a storm. We saw that with Isaias. You can have a very weak hurricane and move inland and cause flooding, can cause massive power failures, and that can be really, really problematic. So again, we need to word our forecast, prepare our warnings, create clever talking points that will move people to make the correct decisions to save lives and protect property. The old saying is, hope is not a plan.
I take it that's it, Dan. So kind of like the Nile is not just a river in Africa. All right, still no dim kids, so last up will be Dan Brown. I've known Dan for quite a number of years now, probably going on 20. Dan has been a senior hurricane specialist at the National Hurricane Center since 2009. He is also the center's warning coordination meteorologist, which is the role that he uses to lead the outreach and hurricane preparedness activities for not only the Hurricane Center, but much of NOAA, conducted along Atlantic and Gulf coasts of the U.S., the Caribbean, Mexico, and Central America. Dan received a degree in meteorology from University of North Carolina in Asheville. Dan has received numerous awards, including the prestigious National Isaac Klein Award for his work in developing hurricane education material. So Dan, good to see you. Take it away.
Hey, thanks, Bill. Great seeing everybody. And sorry I was a couple minutes late getting on. Actually working operations today as well. Certainly a busy day today. And as Dan mentioned, I think we're in for some busy times ahead. And it is great to see everyone this morning. Real short presentation. Mine, some of the points that were hit on by Katie and Dan. I'm kind of also hitting on. Sorry I missed Adrianne's presentation earlier. But it's just really focusing on hazards, impacts when we talk about messaging. And if you really take anything away from today, is this slide. I kind of put my summary slide up front. And these are some things that, we certainly see people struggle with at times when it comes to hurricane messaging. One of them is the cone itself. And kind of preaching to the choir probably here, but it is the fact that as forecasts have improved, as we've narrowed that cone, it's really meaning that more and more impacts are occurring outside it. It's such that we're actually have a social science project right now. We're actually looking at the cone, how it's being used by decision makers, hopefully getting some guidance on where we should go with that product in the future. The other one that's been already touched on is, again, don't focus too much on categories. I have another slide on that in a second. Also, don't focus on those spaghetti models. And then the last thing here is just always a reminder that we're not always going to have 5 days before something perhaps threatens, a coastline. When you go back and look at even the Category 5s that have hit the United States, all of those were just tropical storms a few days before and rapidly strengthened. So just something we have to always pay attention to know that we're not always going to have full 5 days in a long lead time on these tropical systems. The next three slides are a couple of my really big messaging pet peeves, I call them, where I see, I think, just way too much sometimes focus on. The first being, again, the category of storm intensity. We've got to get away from that. Again, the Category 1s have been, very destructive in the U.S. in the past decade. Just saw that with Isaias just recently, again, bringing all those strong winds up along the mid-Atlantic coast after it had become a tropical storm. And then also, with the heavy rainfall, examples I've been here for is the Alberto, 94, Allison, and then Imelda just last year. Again, doesn't take a very strong storm to produce a lot of rainfall, and slow motion can really dump that rainfall and cause significant problems. So, and it's not just always about the category. Sometimes it's just about the storm status. Let's not get hung up too much on if the system's transitioning from something that's tropical to post-tropical as well, because even those post-tropical cyclones can bring strong, winds and impacts. So again, it's always about keeping focused on those impacts and not necessarily, again, that storm category or what the type of storm it is. And this goes here too is downgraded, not to use that term. Really want folks to be keeping that message on these life-threatening hazards. I've seen this way too many times. Actually, I saw it with Florence a couple years ago. We had carefully worded a forecast advisory here to not use downgraded, to keep the focus on those hazards, keep that life-threatening storm surge in the headline. Yet as soon as we sent the advisory out where Florence went from a Category 2 to Category 1, the messaging, some of the national messaging became downgraded. And again, want to stay away from that. I actually saw a little bit of that with Isaias just recently, where we also had some of the messaging was that the system had been downgraded. again, let's try to keep that focus on the various hazards because that's what we have to get the residents, the response to be focused on, and keep folks safe as these storms are threatening. The last thing is just to keep focus on the Hurricane Center forecast. We all like to look at the various model guidance. I have a friend that's a manager of a grocery store, and he occasionally sends me a plot and says, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And trying to get him to continue that focus on our forecast because, again, you have all this experience here. With Lixie Avila retiring this year, it's down a little bit, but we still have about 150 years of experience between all the forecasters here. And again, help us by messaging that official forecast. And I really take this to heart, especially looking at systems like we have now with Invest 97 and 98. These systems have not even formed yet. They don't have a center. The model guidance is likely to jump around a little bit. And so again, it's nice to look at to get the general trends on where things might go. But again, the details I think are going to end up, changing as the system forms and evolves, and we have to be ready to do that. And again, come to the Hurricane Center and help us there. The last thing here I talk about is just overall messaging safety. In order to really, I think, get people to stay safe in hurricanes, we got to know what has caused injuries and fatalities in landfalling tropical cyclones in the past. Thanks to Dr. Ed Rappaport here at the Hurricane Center that's put together all this data that we have now. But again, I'm sure everyone here knows it's all about the water. But I think that the one thing we have to continue to focus on is the number of deaths that are occurring both before and after a storm in the preparation and recovery phases, because we're seeing just as many deaths in that phase as we are from the storm impact themselves, the direct deaths. So again, just about as many as indirect deaths as direct fatalities. And with those indirect fatalities, so many of those are occurring with the older population, that there's 8 times as many indirect fatalities for folks over the age of 60 as under 21. I'll talk in just a second about what's causing a lot of that. But one of the things that as far as direct fatalities that has, to me, been very worrisome in the last few years and really, again, going back in time, is just the number of fatalities that are occurring in motor vehicles due to flooding. People, again, continue to drive around barricades into flooded roadways. I don't know how, what better messaging we need to do, but we need to message this. You look at some of the even car commercials and advertising where they show what looks like an indestructible car going into some hazardous weather. But again, to try to get people to think that, hey, the road may not still exist underneath that area that's flooded, and that only a small amount of water that's flowing can start to move a vehicle. So we, again, really need to get people to focus on and think about that, because we've just had a lot of water-related vehicle deaths in the last few hurricane seasons. And again, the last thing goes back here to those indirect deaths, the ones that are happening before and after. Again, a lot of that's due to cardiovascular heart attacks in the preparation and recovery phases when folks are very stressed and having to deal with a lot. So again, folks need to be taking breaks. We should be helping our neighbors, helping the older population. And then there's also a lot of fatalities related to loss of electricity, improper use of generators, and then other things such as vehicle accidents. And there is some lost life during evacuation, which does show, again, producing a more accurate hurricane forecasting. Try to refine that evacuation area will also help to save lives. And that's all I have. Last slide was just showing, I think, Bill, Ken Graham showed this slide last week, just showing you where we're at in the hurricane season, kind of a typical progression. We still have a long way to go this hurricane season, and it's likely to get quite busy. So hope everyone out there is take the precautions and heeding the advice and starting to get prepared. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Bill.
Okay, thanks, Dan. My first act of preparedness for the day is to go play golf this afternoon, so I might not have the time for it later on this week. I'll kick off the questions. I'll probably bounce back and forth between Tim and I on the questions there. And somebody hit me up with, I think this is a rather provocative question. We talk so much about not getting too hung up on the category or intensity of the storm, yet all you meteorologists forecast is centered around the intensity of the storm. That's the first thing that's mentioned in the products put out either by government agencies, private firms, or on TV. Isn't there a little bit of a disconnect there? And how can we move away from that? What will we replace that with to change that mindset? I actually think there's utility in knowing that information, and people are justifiably interested in it.
I can start real quick, Bill, and I think because we're forecasting how strong the storm is going to be, even if we got away from categories and scales, people are still going to focus on the wind speed. So there's still always going to be something that people are going to focus on. Believe me, as someone that does forecasting, the various thresholds that we have, going from a depression to a storm to hurricane, and then hurricane to major hurricane in the various categories, are some of the very toughest calls to have to make. But again, 5-knot difference between a major hurricane that has 115 mile per hour winds and a category 2 hurricane with 110, those impacts aren't going to be too much different. So I do think we have to get away from that a little bit. But I do agree with you a little bit. There can be some utility as storms are strengthening. It does certainly gain people's attention. I think we saw that with Michael as it was heading toward the northern Gulf, that those forecasts, and as Michael strengthened, certainly garnered more attention, and I think ultimately helped more people to get out of harm's way in that situation at the last minute. But it is the Florences where the storms are coming down that I think is a lot more worrisome, where we just have to try to keep folks focused on water threat, storm surge threat, because again, it doesn't change that much when we're moving down 5 or 10 miles per hour in wind speed.
For the emergency managers in the crowd, the evacuation studies, at least when I was still working, was still pretty well locked in the categories of storms. Has that changed at all for you, or is that still the case? Go ahead.
To me, I still take it as a predominantly surge, because that's what we're going to be looking at, the hurricane evacuation studies. I mean, a lot of my experience, and I don't mean to take from the state, but having the state hat on the head 6 years ago at Louisiana, we still do there is some emphasis still on the category. But the hurricane evacuation study really tries to delve down more into the hazards and specifically the surge. So go ahead, Dan, I'm sorry.
No, I wasn't going to add too much more, but it is at least some of the products that the emergency managers do look at is based on categories for the local area. But I think with things like P-Search now, which accounts for the size and motion of that particular storm, I think that helps start moving away from that a little bit and getting more to what is this storm's potential and storm surge for my area.
Yeah. Katie, what's your experience been in North Carolina on this issue?
I think, as described, I think it can both help us and hurt us. I think it depends on the situation. Obviously, North Carolina was not impacted by Michael, but I do remember that rapid intensification. I remember that being a talking point, that when you go from nothing to something very quickly, that category can help draw people's attention and can help bring some awareness to an otherwise maybe complacent crowd. However, I have seen firsthand in our EOC that when you're talking about a storm teetering on the edge of a tropical storm versus a category 1 or even something higher, and really we have to drill that down to, we're talking about 5 mile an hour difference in the wind. And at the end of the day, that does not matter. I think it is without question that stronger storms cause, in a lot of cases, can be we prepare for more damage, whether it be more wind, more impact overall. And that is important when you're talking about state resources and needing to, is this a storm where we need to call in mutual aid, where we need to move resources from one side of the state to the other? And so in those black and white cases, it is without a doubt helpful. I think it's when it comes to those when we hang on those nuances, when you're talking about a 5 mile an hour difference, it's just that action of bringing people away from the classification and remembering that you're still going to do the same thing regardless.
Great. Dan, you have a different perspective probably.
Exactly. Most of the clients that we deal with, we know what their tolerances are. For example, let me give you an example. There's a sugar operation that goes on down in the deep South Texas, and they had to deal with Hannah, and they have a tall structure that can only withstand so much wind, and so they need to know. The first question they ask is, what's the wind's going to be at, on the top of the structure. They don't care about the surface winds; they're more worried about that, and obviously they're worried about the rain. So they don't even care about the categories. I mean, the categories alert them that something's coming, but they have to deal with that. We have other clients too that they know the vulnerabilities. It could be very heavy rain. They have specific amounts of rain. Like some places, like in the east here, just getting a half an inch of rain in less than 30 minutes time can affect their operations. So they need to know that information right off the bat. Other people may be able to tolerate even more. When we're dealing with the general public, it's a whole new ball game. You have to get but we are so ingrained in wanting to deal with the impacts. That's what we try to shoot here at AccuWeather. We're constantly trying to figure out better ways to word our forecasts to get the threat right, so that people can react to the situation appropriately.
Okay, pardon my phone ringing in the background. Jim, I'm going to kick it back to you real quick to get questions from users while I take this.
Yeah, and Dan talked about some of the vulnerabilities of the corporate world, and how do we get the individuals to really look at what their own vulnerabilities are? You started with that earlier, at the beginning of the talk. And how do we get individuals to know? When we were going into Hurricane Hannah, we told people this is, there'll be wind, but it's going to be a mainly rain event. Flooding is going to be the problem. Of course, the wind came in to 50 miles an hour. Everybody said, well, you said it wasn't going to be windy. Like, well, we got 15 inches of rain too,
Yeah, I think one of a part of people's hurricane plan is knowing what their vulnerability is. And again, if you live 5 blocks inland from the coast, your vulnerability is going to be much different than someone who lives right on the coast. And so I think a lot of people have to deal with that. So they have to know, okay, I've got these trees in my yard. I got this swing set around here. Those are things that people have to know what's going on. And I think another thing too is wind direction. My son used to live up in the Panhandle. He lived in this area where he was like a mile away from the coast, but the storm surge of like 4 feet would bring water into his neighbor's yards. But if he had a hurricane coming in east of him, the wind would be out of the north, and he would actually get shelter because of the trees and everything that were north of him. So I think people just have to understand their vulnerability, and maybe one of the services we need to do is make sure that people, such as insurance adjusters, that they realize what the vulnerabilities are for people, so that they can clearly articulate, what they need to have as far as insurance and how to mitigate the situation.
That last point, before I forget on that last point there, I've been working some with the folks at A&M on a resilience project, and what we found is a lot of insurance companies are doing just what you said. You can actually enter your address, and at least my insurance company, I get both the flood risk and the risk of wildfire.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we need to work a lot on the wind, and that's difficult because it's a combination of the condition of the structure and what building code it was built to. But that's the direction we're moving to, where people can personalize it by their own address as to what, and find out what their risks are. I think within the next decade, we're going to see great improvements there. Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
Barry Goldsmith made a comment online, and Barry's the warning coordination meteorologist for the Weather Service in Brownsville, and one of his comments was during Hannah, the only fatalities we had were all post-storm. It was a family of 4 out of 5 people in a house died from carbon monoxide poisoning. One of them survived, and then an elderly gentleman who fell off a ladder about 70 miles inland after the storm, trying to fix something on the side of the building. And you know, we message so often. We have graphics on TV about generator safety, you know, during the storm. By the way, if you got a generator, here are the rules to follow. But yet people sometimes don't hear it. I don't know how we can more effectively communicate that. I don't know if anybody's got some suggestions on that, but we're open to them.
You can lead the horse to water, but not necessarily make them drink. Because I've seen since Ed Rappaport made that published that study. The media has done a great job of highlighting what those post-storm hazards are. So it's a tough nut to crack. You have another question, Tim, or want to take one?
That's all we've seen come in online. A lot of folks commenting on just the message of the risk and how do we convey that message to people. And
here's the one other question that I saw was you see a whole lot of mismessaging on social media when it comes to hurricanes. From you guys' experience, any suggestions on how to challenge that or take on that challenge?
Silence.
I mean, I would personally say that I think that NOAA as a whole does really, really well. I personally follow all of the social media accounts, and I mean, they're pushing out as much as they can push. I'm not sure if they could push any more, but that would be my only suggestion, is continually be forward facing. And I mean, Ken Graham is live all the time, pushing out that messaging and Facebook and making sure that everyone sees what their hazards are and what precautions they need to take.
I think our technology is kind of bites us sometimes, because people have cell phones they can get almost anything on their cell phone now. They can get radar, they can get satellite, and what I find is most people try to become their own weather people. They try to make decisions which they feel they try to understand. So I don't think we're going to get past that. It's that way in everything that we do now. But I think one thing is clear, and Arianne has said it clearly. You know, we all need to follow NOAA's messaging and making sure that we are all together on the messaging on this. When we diverge from the messaging, that's when it really becomes confusing to people. It's so easy to confuse people. So we depend on the Hurricane Center to provide that anchoring point to make sure the message, the concrete message is there. There's a lot of us, again, like for example in AccuWeather, we've got other concerns that we have for clientele that we have. So, but for the general public, it's vitally important that we all be on the same page.
That's great.
Bill, we did. Go ahead, Dan. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I agree with that. You know, Dan, I really appreciate you bringing that up, because we appreciate the partnership, I think, with the private sector, with the television meteorologists, and I think the partnership has gotten much, much better over time, and also with the emergency management community. That I really think that we're probably issuing as much consistent messaging as we've ever done at this point.
Yes.
And I really think that's great. You know, Hurricane Center, we started putting out the key messages. I know a lot of folks use those. So again, I think we've come a long way. Probably still have some ways to go, but I do think things have evolved. That the whole weather enterprise has basically come together to ensure we're doing that.
I remember hearing that as something years ago at these weather conferences we've been doing. Let's get a consistent message out there. It has come to fruition, it seems like, in a lot of ways, except for the people that put out their own 10-day forecast when they see something on the 384-hour GFS and they post it on the internet. So we did get a good question from Marcel in South Florida. He says most of the Brazilian and Latin communities are not aware of the evacuation routes for preparedness for storms, mostly because they don't have that in their countries. The people don't speak English here. Some of them. Is there any perspective on how to reach those people? And he's talking about 1 million people in South Florida alone. Anybody that wants to try that, go ahead.
So Florida isn't necessarily in my region, but I do know that both the Florida State Department of Emergency Management and the FEMA Region 4 that support Florida. From my knowledge, I know that they do put out a good amount of information. A lot of states, and Katie, you can chime in with this too if you want, but I know a lot of states put out their pamphlets or their preparedness materials in various languages to try and reach that audience. So there's big programs like Know Your Zone and Know Your Hazard. So I think that the information is there. Just maybe a Google search or again, I don't want to put too much emphasis on it, especially when we have Katie here from the state.
So, yeah, very similar to what you said. In North Carolina, we actually have just wrapped up and officially launched our Know Your Zone program. We've never had that before. North Carolina's never had evacuations or formalized that process, I should say. And so we've been trying to navigate this. Eastern North Carolina has a very diverse population when it comes to languages, a large Mandarin population, Spanish. We have a big variety. And as a state, at some point, we've had to draw a line into what we're going to translate just because of capacity. With that said, we have our evacuation information that we've now built and put out. We've made the website and everything on it a separate version that's completely in Spanish. And that was just based on our capabilities, what we had internal, everything was translated in Spanish. But past that, we are really trying to connect the local resources that need more translators and translations done to some state resources that have, whether they be teachers or whether they be just volunteers who can translate in other languages. So maybe we can't do it for them as a state, but we can pair them with someone who can. And it just seems like people especially want to help during disasters or when it relates to that. And so people tend to get pretty kind with being able to meet those needs. If you have a population that needs something translated or needs that type of service, it's not something that we've completely built out, but Know Your Zone has showed us the need to do that and be able to pair, whether it's through, like I said, teachers across the state that have that teach those types of languages in schools and maybe set up something longer term as like that standing resource where you can go, similar to what we do with legal help. I mean, we have a lot of pro bono lawyers that come out after disaster and help with that. Can we do the same thing with translators too, just being able to meet those needs? Like I said, it's not something we've completely built out, but an idea of where we see the gap and where we're trying to go with it. So maybe that could translate, no pun intended, to that question.
Yeah, I'll just add real quick too that it's that there is the foreign language folks. There is certainly a need for that, but there's also a lot of transient population, people moving into new areas that haven't ever experienced a hurricane. I remember being on the hurricane awareness tour a few years ago, and a family had moved from California. They knew everything about earthquakes, but they didn't know anything about hurricanes, and so they basically came to the event to say, "What do we need to do? What should I be doing?" And it's fantastic that they came. But again, we always have to think about those folks. There's people moving into these areas that have never experienced a hurricane and, need to find out if they live in that evacuation zone and understand what they need to do before the start of the hurricane season.
Yeah, to emphasize that point, there's just under 1 million people living in the Houston area now that weren't living in this area when Hurricane Ike hit 12 years ago.
Wow. All right, Bill, do you guys have any more? Anything else you want to add? Anybody? Go ahead.
I want to just thank you all so much for joining us today. Speaking from the old guy on the crew here that remembering Hurricane Allen, because we just didn't have technological capabilities. We've come a long way, and I'm very optimistic as to where the technology is going to take us in the future, and the fact that we're using people that have experts in training and communication skills to help us go better as we go down this road. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it. Dan, Katie, Adrianne, Bill. Great information today. We apologize for the technical issues at the beginning. If you made it through that and got to hear it, I think you got to hear a great program today. So we really appreciate everybody for being part of it. We want to thank our sponsors, of course, USAA, Fly Locks. I spent the weekend finding my plywood because we didn't have time to get it out before Hannah 3 weeks ago because it was buried in the garage. Well, now it's at a place where I can get it out in about 5 minutes, and Fly Locks will plywood can be up in about 15, so that's an important thing. South Padre Island, open for business. The county parks, if you know the island on the north and south end, are not open. They're closed, but the city is open. City beaches are open. Hotels and restaurants are open as long as you promise to social distance at South Padre Island. So those are our sponsors. We appreciate them being part of the program once again. A lot more programs coming up in the future. So let's go back to Alex for a quick update on what else we've got coming up. Alex.
All right. Well, definitely. We have more programs coming up next week. Again, we do apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning, clearly beyond our control. Here, again, our sponsors, USAA, South Padre Island Convention and Tourist Bureau, and Flylock's Hurricane Clips. Next week, we are going to have Cody Berry. He's going to be talking about experimental products. So make sure you join us. That's August the 28th, the 26th, I should say, 10 o'clock in the morning, again, right here. And don't forget, we've got the official NTWC live face masks, and we'll take you back over to Tim Smith so he can kind of give you an idea of what that looks like, and we'll show them to you right there. There you go, Tim. You've got a big picture, and we'll get Tim up there here in just a second. There he is. There you go. It is the official face mask. You can order it on our website. And all our presenters today, they'll get one for free. Thanks so much for joining us. Again, join us again next week. We'll see you at 10 a.m.